Alright, so making a matrix with a silicone putty is significantly easier than making it with stone or a stone plaster mix. There's a couple of things that you have to think about. First off, you need a stiff putty. You can't do this with a soft putty. You want to do this with a lab putty, ideally. The Zermac Platinum 85, this is an 85 Shore, so it's an 85 Shore putty. That's the hardness, and that's a good hardness for something like this. There is a harder putty which is a 95 Shore. However, acrylic doesn't stick to this putty, but it does stick to the one which is the higher Shore number. Don't know why. So you can get a putty like that in a two-part where you mix equal parts, or you can buy it in, so this is I think a 1 kilo, I have a 1 and a 5, I think this is a 1 kilo. So this one has the putty base, and then there is a gel which looks like toothpaste. Here's one here. This is another way to get this. It's a similar, so these are similar types of lab putty. This is also an 85 Shore, but this one, this we have at school, and you're going to mix equal size amounts of that. For this one, what you're going to do is use the scoop that they provide. You're going to grab a scoop of the lab material, of the putty. I'm going to take it from another bucket I got here because that bucket's not open. So there's a scoop of the material, and I'm going to, so 1 scoop of the putty, and then what I would do is take this catalyst and I would put a line of catalyst along from end to end of the putty, and that's about the right amount of catalyst for this. And then you just mix it up until it goes to a uniform, like pinkish color. I use this putty most of the time. This is what I use in the lab. I don't generally use the other putty. Either of them will work really well. This one tends to be a little stiffer, and I use it for a ton of stuff. You can also adjust the setting time on this one by how much of the catalyst. So the color of this can be anywhere from a kind of light grayish pink to a fairly dark red, depending on how much catalyst you put in it, and depending on, you know, and that controls how quickly it's going to set. Okay, but we don't have that putty at school. We have this putty at school. So these come with little scoops. There's a blue scoop for the green, or you can get, I think they come in blue and yellow. They're usually matched to the colors, but I have blue and yellow usually for these. So I've scooped out the white. So you want an equal amount of each of these materials. So I've got a scoop of the white there. You have 2 scoops because you don't want to contaminate these. You don't want to get any of this in there, and you don't want any of this in there because it'll cause the materials to start to react. So you're just going to scoop some of the material out. I just got some white in there. That was bad. Just going to scoop it out until you have a level amount with your scoop here. Oops. Put the lid back on. Not that I need to, but you know. Okay, so there's my 2 equal scoops of the white and the green. Now, the differences between this material and using stone to make this matrix is that this is flexible. So there's one difference. And that's a big difference because you have to make sure that you use enough of this material to make a large, thick matrix so that it doesn't flex. So, an example here where I would be using the matrix has a tooth in it, and it's going to place this tooth into that denture, but the matrix is much bigger than the tooth. It's covering at least one tooth on each side. In this case, it's covering two teeth on each side. And the reason for all of this putty material is so that it doesn't flex. It's not going to bend. Because what tends to happen with something like this is you put your acrylic there, you take your putty or your matrix, you line it up, and then you press like this. And if the matrix is too thin, when you press in the center on top of the tooth, it's going to bend this way, and then your tooth doesn't end up where you wanted it to go because you've distorted the matrix. So that's a huge difference between doing this with the putty and with the stone. A convenient difference, because it's flexible, you can take it right over the incisals of the teeth. You can get the tooth in and out of it easily. And also this silicone material doesn't bond to the acrylic, so that you don't have to separate this. Works really well. I will use this material if I'm making a matrix for 2-3 teeth. Depending on the case, I might do 4 teeth if, you know, like when we were down in the clinic in Jamaica and I needed to do a quick denture for 4 teeth. This is the way I would do it, because this is also a much faster way to do it. But normally, dealing with a patient here, if I'm making a 2 or at most a 3-tooth flipper, I would use this material. Okay. To work with it, I'm going to want a couple of knives. I want one with a fairly long blade, and I'm going to use this to cut the material while it's soft. And then I've got a scalpel, which doesn't have to be scalpel sharp, but fairly sharp, and this is going to cut the material once it's set up a little bit and clean up parts of the material. So I'm going to take these 2 little blobs. I'm just going to mix them together. I do it by just pushing with my thumbs into the ball of material and continually kind of rotating it around until you get a nice even color. You don't want to see any streaks in your material. If you've got any streaks, then those areas are not going to set properly. They're not going to harden, and your matrix is not going to be a lot of good. I'm just going to form the matrix into a ball or whatever shape is appropriate for what you're doing. In this case, it's just a single tooth, so a ball will do. I'm going to apply it from the buccal here, and notice that I've got quite a bit of material to the incisal of the tooth. I want there to be that thickness to the incisal, because remember, when I press it down, I don't want it to bend. And I just kind of pat it onto the model there, and there we go. That's about it. Now, you can wet your finger and smooth this out. You can even just use your finger. The oils in your finger will smooth this material. You don't have to, but it's nice if you don't have your fingerprints all over it. If you want to cut the material at this point, I can use a fairly dull knife to cut it while it's soft. And if you've made it pretty big, it's not a bad idea to cut it down a little bit. You can also use your scalpel to cut it. The material is going to cut really easily at this point. Just make sure you cut all the way down to the stone, and then just kind of peel it off. Okay. Now this is just for doing the repair. It's just for positioning the tooth. So you don't have to be overly fastidious about how nice it looks, but it's always good to work with something that looks nicer. By the way, you'll notice that the side I cut with the dull blade when it was soft is nicer than the cut I did with the scalpel. The scalpel blade wasn't quite long enough to do a nice job of this. You can clean it up so the material is starting to set up. It's stiffer now, so I wouldn't be able to cut it easily with the dull knife now. And if you really want, you can, once the material has set up, you can take your handpiece and a burr and you can smooth it with your handpiece and a burr. And for some of the things we do, we are going to want to smooth it. So you can smooth it with a knife, you can smooth it with a handpiece, you can smooth it with a stone or a, well, you can smooth it with anything, but I wouldn't use the big white stone in a bench lathe, more like the handpiece stones. But you can trim this with just about anything. Once it's completely set up, I'm just going to trim down here. I want to make sure that the lingual of the tooth that I'm going to be doing the acrylic work on is exposed. I don't want the silicone on the lingual to come all the way down to the palatal tissue, because if it does, there's not going to be any room for the acrylic that I'm adding. There's not going to be any room for the acrylic of the partial, which makes it kind of hard to hold the tooth into place. So, just got to let that set up a little bit, and there's a matrix in silicone for a flipper denture. Something I didn't mention with the silicone matrix here is that you don't have to separate the stone before making the silicone matrix. You can just do it over dry stone, whatever, doesn't matter. You don't have to separate the tooth, you don't have to separate the wax or the stone, and the matrix will just pop off after it's set. This is where the scalpel comes in useful. You can go in and just clean up any little raggedy bits that are around the matrix, but otherwise this is done and ready. We can go ahead and boil off the tooth, put the tooth in here, and do our repair or make our partial.